The entire room full of chattering executives fell silent in an instant. Crystal chandelier lights reflected off the CFO's niece's wary eyes as I offered what seemed like a harmless congratulation. The air turned thick, almost suffocating, as her phone screen flickered with a message I wasn't meant to see. I didn't know then that within hours, they'd regret ignoring my warning and lose $310 million in just 2 days. My name is Harper Lane, and for 10 years, I'd poured my soul into Ravenwood Capital. Every algorithm, every security protocol, every line of code in our billion-dollar audit system bore my fingerprints. That night at the Peninsula Chicago, surrounded by the city's financial elite, I should have felt invincible. Instead, I was about to learn how quickly loyalty becomes liability when you threaten the wrong person's secrets. The ballroom shimmered with calculated elegance marble columns, gold-leafed ceilings, and conversations that moved millions with each whispered promise. I'd been nursing the same champagne flute for an hour, watching Vanessa Cross hold court near the ice sculpture. The CFO's niece had arrived at Ravenwood 6 months ago, sliding into a VP position like silk through fingers, where I'd climbed each rung through sleepless nights and flawless deliverables. She'd simply appeared, fully formed, at the executive table. Harper. Marcus Winters, our head of acquisitions, caught my elbow. Have you heard about the Singapore expansion? Vanessa's been working on something massive. The words tumbled from my mouth before I could stop them. I crossed the room, champagne fizzing against my palm, and approached her circle. She wore Valentino. I recognized the cut from the fashion magazines scattered in our break room, and her laugh rang hollow as crystal. Vanessa, I said, raising my glass. I heard wonderful things about your project. Congratulations on the big news that's coming. The transformation was instantaneous. Her laugh died mid-note. The executives around her shifted, creating space as if I'd become radioactive. Vanessa's green eyes, which usually held the vacant pleasantness of someone who'd never faced real adversity, sharpened to surgical points. What big news? Her voice dropped an octave. Silk becoming steel wire. The Singapore expansion, Marcus mentioned. Marcus mentioned nothing. She pulled out her phone, fingers flying across the screen. The device's glow caught her face from below, casting shadows that made her look almost skeletal. Excuse me. She stepped away, but not before I caught the message blooming across her screen. Add her to the list. Handle it tonight. My stomach turned to ice water. The champagne glass trembled in my hand as I watched her disappear into the crowd, her heels clicking a funeral march against marble. Around me, conversations resumed with forced brightness, but I caught the sideways glances, the subtle steps backward, as if my professional death was contagious. I tried to rejoin Marcus, but he'd vanished. My other colleagues developed sudden fascinations with their phones or urgent needs to visit the restroom. Within minutes, I stood alone in a room of 300 people, as isolated as if I'd been dropped in the Arctic. The security arrived at 9:47 p.m. Exactly, I remember, because I'd just checked my phone, hoping for some explanation, some sign that I'd misread the situation. 2 men in dark suits, earpieces coiled like snakes behind their ears, flanked me with practiced efficiency. Ms. Lane, we need you to come with us. Is there a problem? The taller one, his badge read. Morrison didn't smile. Please come quietly. We wouldn't want to disturb the other guests. They guided me through the crowd like Moses parting the Red Sea. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A junior analyst I'd mentored actually stepped behind a column to avoid eye contact. The walk to the service elevator stretched like taffy, each step echoing my accelerating heartbeat. As the elevator doors closed, cutting off the last view of my professional world, Morrison finally spoke. Ms. Cross is waiting in conference room A, 52nd floor. The city lights blurred past the glass as we ascended, Chicago's skyline becoming a jury of illuminated windows, all watching my descent. I'd built my life in rooms like the one waiting for me, sterile spaces where careers were made and destroyed with equal indifference, but I'd never imagined I'd be the one in the defendant's chair. The doors opened to darkness punctuated by the conference room's glow. Through the glass walls, I saw Vanessa seated at the head of the table, her laptop open like a guillotine. She didn't look up as we approached. just gestured to the chair across from her with one manicured finger. "Sit," she said, still typing. "This won't take long." The conference room felt like a meat locker, all sharp edges and Arctic air conditioning. Vanessa's fingers danced across her keyboard for another full minute before she finally looked up, her face carved from marble. "Do you know why you're here?" She closed the laptop with deliberate slowness, the sound echoing like a coffin lid. "I assume it's about what I said downstairs. But Vanessa, I was simply—" "Stop." Her hand sliced through the air. "You were simply demonstrating that you've been accessing confidential executive communications, proving that you can't be trusted with sensitive information." "I haven't accessed anything." Marcus mentioned the Singapore project in passing. "Marcus Berg left for his flight to Dubai 3 hours ago. Try again." My mind raced. She was right, I'd been confusing Marcus with Martin from legal. But that didn't explain this theatrical interrogation. There must be some misunderstanding. "The only misunderstanding," Vanessa leaned forward, her perfume sharp as a blade, "is your belief that you're irreplaceable. You think because you built our systems, you own them. But Harper, you're just an employee, a replaceable cog." She opened a folder I hadn't noticed before, spreading documents across the table like tarot cards predicting my doom. Violation of confidentiality agreements, unauthorized access to executive-level data, industrial espionage. "That's insane. I've never—" "Your access logs suggest otherwise." She tapped a printout covered in timestamps and IP addresses. "Funny how someone at your level keeps appearing in directories they have no business accessing." I leaned forward to examine the logs, but she snatched them back. "I don't need to defend myself against fabricated evidence." "Fabricated." Vanessa's laugh was winter wind through dead leaves. "Harper, you just proved your guilt downstairs. Information about Singapore was classified level 5. Only 7 people in this company knew about it, and you're not one of them." "Then how did I—" "Exactly the question HR will be asking, along with the FBI. If we decide to press charges—" She produced a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the table. "But I'm feeling generous. Sign this, and we'll call it a resignation. Refuse, and I'll have security escort you out in handcuffs." The document swam before my eyes. Immediate termination, forfeiture of all benefits, a non-disclosure agreement so comprehensive it might as well have been a gag order, and at the bottom, a line absolving Ravenwood of any wrongdoing while accepting full responsibility for security breaches and ethical violations. "This is illegal. You can't—" "I can't what?" Vanessa stood, towering over me in her heels. "I can't protect this company from a rogue employee who's been stealing secrets. I can't ensure that someone who betrayed our trust faces consequences." She moved to the window, Chicago sprawling below us like a circuit board. "You have 2 minutes to decide. Sign, or I make a call that ends with your name in every financial blacklist from here to Hong Kong." My hands shook as I picked up the pen. 10 years of 70-hour weeks, of missed birthdays and canceled vacations, reduced to a signature. But what choice did I have? Fight a battle where my opponent controlled the battlefield, the weapons, and the rules. 1 minute. I thought of the system I'd built, every fail-safe and protection I'd woven into its code. All those late nights ensuring that no one, not even executives, could manipulate the data without leaving traces. The irony tasted like copper pennies. 30 seconds. I signed my name with deliberate precision, each letter a small rebellion. Vanessa snatched the paper before the ink dried, feeding it into her laptop scanner with obvious satisfaction. "Your access has been terminated effective immediately." She tapped her phone. "Security will escort you to clear your desk. You have 10 minutes to remove personal items. Any attempt to access company systems or contact company personnel will be considered a violation of your NDA." The guards appeared as if summoned by her contempt. As they flanked me, Vanessa delivered her final blow. "Oh, and Harper, that announcement you mentioned, it goes live in an hour, thanks to your breach. We'll be implementing new security protocols. I'll be sure to mention in the all-hands memo that your termination is what prompted these necessary changes." The walk to my desk was a funeral procession through cubicle graveyards. Word had already spread heads, prairie-dogged over partitions before ducking back down. 10 years of relationships evaporated like morning dew. Even my assistant, Janet, who'd brought me soup when I worked through the flu. busied herself with paperwork as I packed my life into a banker's box. At 10:58 p.m., I stood on the sidewalk, holding a cardboard box of desk plants and coffee mugs, while Lake Michigan wind cut through my dress. The Ravenwood building loomed above, its windows like eyes watching my exile. My phone buzzed, a company-wide email from Vanessa Cross, VP of Strategic Initiatives. I didn't need to read it to know my professional assassination was complete. But as I hailed a cab, something else buzzed, a notification I'd never seen before, from deep within the authentication app I'd designed. Tier 3 surveillance mode activated, unauthorized termination detected, fail-safe protocol initiated. The game, it seemed, was just beginning. The cab's heater struggled against Chicago's bite as I stared at my phone, that notification pulsing like a heartbeat. Tier 3. Surveillance mode, words I'd typed years ago, never expecting to see them surface. My fingers trembled as I opened the authentication app, entering my biometric data with practiced precision. The screen bloomed with cascading code, beautiful and terrible as a nuclear reaction. 3 years ago, after watching a colleague get scapegoated for executive embezzlement, I'd built something into Ravenwood's audit system. Not a backdoor those could be found. Instead, I'd created a dead man's switch, elegant in its simplicity. If my access was terminated without proper protocol, without the 3-stage verification process I'd mandated for all senior staff, the system would assume foul play. It would begin preserving everything, every transaction, every modified entry, every access log. More importantly, it would create an encrypted mirror of all data from the moment of termination, packaging it for automated delivery to the Federal Oversight Committee. Where to? The cab driver's voice pulled me from my screen. Just drive. I'll tell you when to stop. As we merged into Lakeshore Drive traffic, my phone began its symphony, notification after notification, the system reporting like a faithful soldier, database snapshots completing, transaction logs packaging, and then, the most interesting alert, anomalous activity detected in accounts 7739A through 7739K, manual override attempted at 11:12 p.m. 11:12, less than 15 minutes after my termination. I pulled up the remote monitoring dashboard, another safeguard they didn't know existed. The system allowed one external view-only access point, bound to my biometric signature and personal encryption key. Not enough to change anything, but sufficient to watch the watchers. The cab's meter ticked past $30 as I witnessed Vanessa's panic in real time. Her user ID pinged across multiple restricted directories, each access attempt triggering another preservation protocol. She was looking for something specific, her digital footprints erratic as a cornered animal's. Then I saw it. Account 7739F, Singapore Development Fund. Balance showing negative 310 million. The timestamp on the last legitimate entry was 6 months ago, the week Vanessa arrived at Ravenwood. My throat constricted. This wasn't about confidentiality or imagined slights. I'd stumbled onto something massive, and Vanessa had moved to silence me before I could dig deeper. The system's next alert made my blood freeze. External breach attempt detected. Non-company IP requesting kernel access. Someone was trying to break into the system. The IP traced to a known grey hat hub, the kind of place where corporate fixers found digital mercenaries. But my beautiful paranoid creation was already responding, its defenses rising like antibodies against infection. Every illegal access attempt generated more evidence. Every forced entry triggered deeper archival protocols. The system began uploading its encrypted packages to the federal servers, each file stamped with immutable blockchain verification. Even if they destroyed the primary servers, the evidence would survive. Miss, you okay? The driver glanced at me in the mirror. Yes, take me to 900 North Michigan, please. My apartment building appeared through the snow that had begun to fall, each flake catching streetlight like fragments of my shattered career. But as I paid the driver and climbed to my unit, carrying my pathetic box of possessions, I felt something I hadn't expected: excitement. In my home office, I set up my personal workstation, accessing the monitoring dashboard on screens Ravenwood's IT department had never touched. The show was just beginning. Vanessa had called in someone serious. Their digital signature was sophisticated, layered with proxies and false trails. But they'd made a crucial error. They were trying to breach the system as if it were normal architecture, unaware of the dual-key authentication built into its core. The system required two elements for critical modifications: digital credentials and biometric verification tied to a valid company ID. Without both, it would lock down harder than Fort Knox. And since my ID had been terminated outside of protocol, the system now considered every high-level access attempt suspicious by default. I watched their frustration mount through failed attempt after failed attempt. Password crackers shattered against encryption that rebuilt itself with each assault. SQL injections dissolved in honeypots that cataloged every strategy. They were fighting my system with conventional weapons, unaware it had been designed by someone who'd studied every major corporate breach of the last decade. At 1:43 a.m., a new player entered the game. The access logs showed a physical terminal activation in the server room. Someone was attempting a direct hardware intervention, but even there, I'd been thorough. The system's critical processes ran in distributed clusters across multiple data centers. Destroying one node would only trigger failover protocols and alert the Federal Oversight Committee to potential evidence tampering. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Name your price." I deleted it without responding, but screenshot the evidence first. Another piece for the federal investigators who'd be knocking on Ravenwood's door within days. By 3 a.m., the system had uploaded 14 terabytes of evidence to federal servers. Transaction histories, access logs, communication records, a comprehensive autopsy of financial fraud. Every attempt to stop it had only generated more evidence, like a hydra sprouting heads with each cut. I leaned back in my chair, watching Vanessa's digital trail spiral into desperation. She'd wanted me silent and discredited. Instead, she'd activated a mechanism that would bring down everything she'd tried to protect. The irony tasted sweeter than champagne. The war room at Ravenwood must have looked like a digital Verdun. Through my monitoring dashboard, I watched access attempts escalate from sophisticated to desperate. At 4:17 a.m., a new signature appeared in the log. Someone with serious skills had joined Vanessa's crisis team. I cross-referenced the digital fingerprint against known profiles in the security community. Rafe Maddox. The name sent a chill through me. He wasn't just gray hat. He was the kind of specialist corporations called when legal solutions had failed. His reputation was built on cracking uncrackable systems, the digital equivalent of a safe cracker who could hear tumblers fall from across a room. But Rafe had never faced a system designed by someone who'd studied his previous work. His initial probes were elegant, almost respectful. He mapped the system's architecture like a chess grandmaster surveying the board, identifying defensive patterns and testing response times. Within an hour, he discovered what the previous attackers had missed. The dual-key authentication wasn't just a security measure, it was the system's fundamental structure. I poured myself coffee with hands steadier than they'd been all night. On screen, Rafe's attempts grew more creative. He tried timing attacks to exploit processing delays, injected code designed to mirror legitimate biometric signatures, even attempted to create phantom user profiles that might bypass the verification protocols. Each strategy revealed his growing understanding and frustration. The system's responses were becoming more aggressive, shorter windows between lockouts, deeper encryption spirals. What he couldn't know was that the system was learning from his attacks, adapting its defenses based on algorithms I'd borrowed from immune system research. At 5:28 a.m., Rafe changed tactics. Instead of attacking the authentication system, he began probing the connections to external servers. Smart. If he couldn't stop the upload, perhaps he could corrupt the data in transit or redirect it to servers under Vanessa's control. But I'd anticipated that too. The federal servers weren't just receiving data, they were sending confirmation packets back, creating an unbreakable chain of custody. Any interruption would trigger immediate alerts to federal investigators, complete with IP addresses and timestamp logs of the interference. My secondary monitor lit up with activity from inside Ravenwood's headquarters. Security camera feeds showed Vanessa pacing the executive floor, her designer heels wearing grooves in carpet that cost more per square foot than most people's rent. 3 other figures hunched over laptops her crisis team, probably IT staff dragged from their beds with promises of bonuses or threats of termination. Then I spotted Rafe himself. recognizable from security conference photos, mid-30s, unremarkable except for eyes that processed information like a supercomputer. He sat perfectly still while chaos swirled around him, fingers dancing across a keyboard with surgical precision. At 6:07 a.m., he stopped typing. On my screen, I watched him lean back, pull off his glasses, and rub his eyes. Then he stood and walked to where Vanessa was conducting her frantic pace. I couldn't hear their conversation, but body language told the story. Rafe's gestures were controlled, professional, the movements of someone delivering bad news to a volatile client. Vanessa's reaction was pure theater, hands flying, face cycling through denial, anger, and something approaching fear. Rafe returned to his station but didn't resume typing. Instead, he began documenting, creating what I recognized as a forensic report. He was covering himself, establishing a record that he'd found the system in an already compromised state. Smart man. He knew this would end in courtrooms and congressional hearings. Then he did something unexpected. His fingers moved in a pattern I recognized, not an attack, but a message. He was typing in the login field, knowing it would be logged, knowing I might be watching. Elegant work, dual biometric with degrading quantum keys. Never seen distributed verification this deep. Respect. A pause, then, they're going to burn you for this, but they burned themselves first. Vanessa must have seen him typing because she stormed over, laptop slamming shut with enough force to echo through the camera feed. But the message had already joined the logs, another piece of evidence that would puzzle federal investigators. By 6:45 a.m., the Situation Room had taken on a different energy, resignation replacing desperation. Rafe packed his equipment with methodical care while Vanessa made phone calls, each conversation shorter and more heated than the last. I pulled up the upload status, 93% complete, in less than an hour, 3 years of financial records, transaction logs, and access patterns would be in federal hands. The Singapore Fund's mysterious deficit would be impossible to hide, along with whatever else Vanessa had been manipulating in her 6-month tenure. My phone buzzed again, another unknown number, but this time I recognized the area code. Ravenwood's legal department. Ms. Lane. This is David Hutchinson from Sherman, Klein, and Associates. I'm calling on behalf of Ravenwood Capital. We'd like to discuss a potential resolution to tonight's misunderstanding. I almost laughed. From termination to negotiation in 8 hours. I'm listening. My clients are prepared to offer a substantial settlement in exchange for your cooperation in resolving certain technical difficulties. Would you be available for a meeting this morning? I'll consider it. Have your clients call me directly when they're ready to discuss terms. Ms. Lane, time is of the essence. Yes, I interrupted, watching the upload percentage tick toward completion. It certainly is. I hung up and returned to my monitors. Rafe was gone. His workstation dark. Vanessa remained, but her frantic energy had collapsed into something smaller, defeated. She sat alone in the glass conference room where hours ago she'd ended my career, staring at her phone like it might offer absolution. The upload counter reached 97%. Soon, her uncle the CFO would learn what his niece had been doing with the company's money. The board would discover why their Singapore expansion had been so carefully guarded, and federal investigators would have everything they needed to unravel $310 million worth of creative accounting. All because she'd fired me without following protocol. My apartment had become a command center. 3 monitors displayed different views of Ravenwood's digital collapse while I documented everything on a 4th. The federal upload had completed at 7:18 a.m., but that was just the beginning. Now I had access to something even more valuable, a complete record of their cover-up attempts. Through the system's hidden dashboard, I watched Vanessa's fraud unfold like a time-lapse video of decay. The Singapore Development Fund hadn't just lost money, it had never existed in the first place. She'd created a phantom project, complete with fabricated reports and doctored approval chains, siphoning funds into a web of offshore accounts. The genius was in its simplicity. Small transfers, each below audit thresholds, spread across dozens of subsidiary accounts, death by 1,000 cuts, invisible unless you knew where to look. But the system I designed saw everything. Pattern-matching algorithms highlighting the money's path like a GPS tracking stolen goods. I pulled up the video feeds from Ravenwood's security cameras, another feature they didn't know I could access. The executive floor looked like a hospital ward at shift change. Vanessa had been joined by her uncle, CFO Richard Cross, his face purple with rage as he reviewed printouts scattered across the conference table. Their body language told a story of family betrayal. Richard's gestures were sharp, accusatory. Vanessa had shrunk into herself, designer armor crumbling. At one point, he swept the papers off the table, documents fluttering like white flags of surrender. But the real show was in the data streams. Every attempt to modify records generated new evidence. They were trying to rebuild the Singapore Fund's history, create retroactive approvals, manufacture a paper trail that might satisfy investigators. Each falsification was logged, time-stamped, and compared against the archived originals. At 8:33 a.m., a new player entered my surveillance feed, a woman in a severe black suit, walking with the purposeful stride of federal authority. Behind her, two assistants wheeled boxes that I recognized document preservation containers, the kind used when agencies seized evidence. The FBI had arrived earlier than expected. Panic rippled through Ravenwood's floors like a stone dropped in still water. Through various camera feeds, I watched employees scatter from their desks, phones lighting up with calls from legal counsel. The federal team set up in a conference room, their movements methodical as they began the process of freezing assets and securing documentation. My phone rang. Richard Cross himself, his number displayed clearly. Ms. Lane. His voice had lost the smooth confidence I remembered from quarterly meetings. I believe there's been a grave misunderstanding. Has there? My niece acted without authority. Her termination of your employment violated numerous protocols. We'd like to correct this immediately. I pulled up the latest transaction logs. Even now, as federal agents commandeered their servers, someone was trying to move money. Your niece seems to be acting with quite a bit of authority right now. Account 8834B just initiated a wire transfer to the Caymans. Silence. Then, that's being addressed. Harper, we need your expertise. The system you built. We need you to help us understand what's happening. I understand perfectly. Your niece created a fictitious project to embezzle $310 million. When I accidentally revealed knowledge of it, she terminated me to prevent discovery. The system documented everything. Harper, please. The federal investigators will need full access to interpret the data correctly. I'm sure they'll have questions about the dual key authentication, the blockchain verification, the distributed architecture, technical details that only I can explain. His breathing was audible through the phone. What do you want? Through the security feed. I watched Vanessa being escorted from the building by federal agents. Her perfect composure had shattered completely, tears cutting channels through her makeup as photographers captured her perp walk. I want my reputation restored, a public statement acknowledging wrongful termination, full severance and benefits as outlined in my original contract, and consulting fees for any assistance I provide to federal investigators. Done. Can you stop? Stop what the system is functioning exactly as designed. When executive access is terminated improperly, it preserves evidence to prevent fraud. I can't stop what's already complete. The uploads. Completed at 7:18 a.m., the Federal Oversight Committee has everything. Transaction histories, communication logs, access records, even video feeds of tonight's breach attempts. Did you know your niece hired Rafe Maddox? That alone will add cyber terrorism charges to the fraud indictments. Richard's voice cracked. There must be something. There is. You can cooperate fully with investigators. You can implement the governance protocols I recommended 3 years ago. And you can ensure that no one ever again thinks they're above the systems designed to protect shareholder interests. I watched him on the security feed, slumped in his chair as federal agents boxed up documents around him. The mighty CFO reduced to a broken man watching his empire crumble. Your consulting rate, he asked finally. $5,000 per hour, 50-hour minimum, and I retain all rights to publish academic papers on the system's architecture after the investigation concludes. Send the contract to legal. I hung up and leaned back, watching the feeds as Ravenwood Capital convulsed through its death throes. In her arrogance, Vanessa had triggered the very mechanisms meant to prevent her crimes. The system had performed flawlessly. a digital immune response to corruption. By 9 a.m., news vans had surrounded the building. Market futures showed Ravenwood stock in freefall, and somewhere in federal custody. Vanessa was learning that her uncle's influence had limits, hard limits defined by criminal statute and documented evidence. I closed my laptop and stood, stretching muscles cramped from hours of vigilance. The war was over. The system had won. Time to send my consulting invoice. The Ravenwood boardroom had never felt